Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're going to take a very slow, very detailed journey into something that might seem simple at first glance, but reveals an entire world when we look closer. We're going to explore the everyday reality of Victorian patent medicines. Not the dramatic stories you might have heard. Not the sensational tales of addiction and scandal. But the quiet, mundane, almost meditative routine of how ordinary people use these substances day after day, year after year. Imagine, if you will, a typical morning in 1885. The light is just beginning to filter through heavy curtains. Somewhere in London or Manchester, or perhaps a smaller market town, a woman is waking up. Her name might be Elizabeth, or Margaret, or Mary. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what happens next. And how unremarkable it all seemed at the time. Let's begin at the beginning, with the morning routine, and we'll take our time, because that's exactly how the Victorians experienced it. Slowly, methodically, day after day. The bedroom is cold. It's always cold in the morning, unless you're quite wealthy and have servants who've already lit the fire. But for most middle-class Victorian families, the morning begins with that sharp chill in the air. You can see your breath sometimes. The floor is even colder when your feet touch it. But before getting out of bed, there's often something else. On the nightstand, within easy reach, sits a small brown bottle. Perhaps it's labelled Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, or Godfrey's Cordial, or Dover's Powder, or any of a dozen other names that were as familiar to Victorian households as aspirin is to us today. The bottle is made of thick, dark glass. This is intentional. The dark glass protects the contents from light, which might, they believed, degrade the medicine's effectiveness. The cork stopper fits snugly, but not too tightly. After all, this bottle is opened multiple times a day. It needs to be accessible. Let's watch as our hypothetical Victorian woman reaches for this bottle. Her hand moves slowly, not from caution, but from habit. This is something she's done so many times that her body knows the motion without thought. Fingers curl around the bottle. The glass is cool to the touch, but not unpleasantly so. There's something almost comforting in its weight, its solidity. She pulls out the cork. There's a soft pop, not dramatic, just a small sound in the quiet morning. The smell that emerges is complex, sweet, but with an edge of bitterness. If you were there, you might detect notes of anise or licorice, or perhaps a hint of alcohol. The scent is not unpleasant. In fact, many people found it rather nice. Medicinal, yes, but in a way that suggested efficacy, that suggested care. Now comes the measuring. Some bottles came with small measuring glasses. Tiny things, marked with lines indicating teaspoons or fractions thereof. But just as often, people simply used a regular teaspoon from their dressing table or nightstand. The precision wasn't always the point, the ritual was. Watch as she tips the bottle. The liquid inside is thick, not quite syrupy, but definitely more viscous than water. It pours slowly, with a kind of deliberate sluggishness. Glug, glug, glug out into the spoon. The colour is dark, amber perhaps, or a deep brownish red. In the dim morning light, It's hard to tell exactly, but it catches what little light there is, giving it an almost jewel-like quality. She brings the spoon to her lips, pauses for just a moment, then tilts it back. The liquid slides across her tongue. The taste is immediately apparent. Sweet at first. Quite sweet, actually. Many patent medicines contain significant amounts of sugar or honey. But beneath that sweetness is something else. A slight bitterness. A warmth that isn't just about temperature. And perhaps, if she's paying attention, a faint numbness beginning at the tip of her tongue. She swallows. The liquid goes down smoothly. Too smoothly, perhaps. There's no unpleasant aftertaste, not really. Just that lingering sweetness and a feeling of, well, it's hard to describe. Warmth, spreading. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The bottle goes back on the nightstand. Cork replaced. Everything returns to its place. This entire process has taken perhaps 60 seconds. Maybe less. It's not a ceremony, you see. It's just something that happens. Like brushing one's hair or putting on one's slippers. Mundane. Ordinary. Repeated so many times that it barely registers as an event at all. But let's pause here for a moment and consider what was actually in that bottle. Because understanding the contents helps us understand everything that follows. Most Victorian patent medicines, and we should be clear, patent here doesn't actually mean patented in the legal sense, but rather that they were proprietary, branded products, contained a fairly consistent set of ingredients. The exact ratios varied from brand to brand, from formula to formula. But certain elements appeared again and again. First, there was almost always alcohol. Quite a bit of it, actually. Many patent medicines were anywhere from 20 to 40% alcohol by volume. That's similar to wine, or even stronger. This served several purposes. Alcohol acted as a preservative, allowing the medicine to be stored for long periods without refrigeration. It also acted as a solvent, helping to extract and suspend the active ingredients from various herbs and plants. And of course, it had its own effects. A sense of relaxation, a slight elevation of mood. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable if you were paying attention. Then there were the opiates. This is where things become more interesting from our modern perspective, though again, it was entirely unremarkable at the time. Morphine. Laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol. Heroin, once it was synthesized in the 1890s. Sometimes these were listed explicitly on the label. Often they were not. Or they were hidden behind euphemisms like active ingredients from the poppy, or simply soothing compounds. The opiate content varied wildly. Some medicines contained tiny amounts, barely enough to have any effect beyond placebo. Others contained quite substantial doses. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which was marketed primarily for teething babies but widely used by adults as well, contained morphine sulfate. The exact amount changed over the years as regulations began to slowly emerge, but in its earliest formulations, a single dose could contain enough morphine to cause genuine sedation. Beyond the alcohol and opiates, there were usually various plant-based ingredients. These were often listed on the label, sometimes with great fanfare. Contains extracts of chamomile, valerian root, and wild lettuce. A label might proclaim. Or, formulated with Indian hemp and black cohosh. These ingredients were chosen for various reasons. Some had genuine mild sedative properties. Others were included simply because they sounded exotic or scientific. The Victorian public had a great appetite for anything that seemed to come from far-off lands or to be based on ancient wisdom. Sugar or honey made up a significant portion of the mixture as well. This served to mask the bitter taste of some ingredients, particularly the opiates. But it also made the medicine more palatable for regular use. Something that tasted pleasant was more likely to be taken consistently, which of course meant more bottles sold. Finally, there were often various oils and flavorings. Anise oil was popular, giving many medicines a licorice-like taste. Peppermint oil appeared frequently. Sometimes there were fruit essences. Cherry was particularly common. These weren't just for taste, though that was certainly a factor. They also contributed to the medicine's identity, its brand recognition. A family might specifically request that cherry one, or the one that smells like anise, even if they couldn't remember the official name. So when our Victorian woman took her morning spoonful, she was consuming a complex mixture. Alcohol providing immediate warmth and mild euphoria. Sugar giving an energy boost. Opiates beginning their slow, subtle work of pain relief and mood alteration. And various herbs and flavorings contributing their own minor effects. Or at least the comforting feeling that one was taking something wholesome and natural. But here's what's crucial to understand. None of this seemed strange or dangerous at the time. This was simply medicine. It was what people did when they felt unwell, or tired, or anxious, or unable to sleep, or increasingly, when they simply wanted to feel normal. Because feeling normal, for many Victorian people, came to depend on these substances. Let's return to our morning routine. Our Victorian woman has taken her medicine. Now she needs to get dressed. And this is where we can begin to see how the medicine affects the day, in small, subtle ways. Getting dressed in the Victorian era was not a simple matter. For a middle-class woman, the process could easily take 30 minutes or more, and it usually required help, particularly with fastening buttons and laces that were positioned at the back of garments. But this morning, let's say, there's no maid available yet. Or perhaps this is a household that can't quite afford a full-time servant, and so our woman must manage mostly on her own. She starts with her undergarments. The chemise comes first. A long, loose garment, made of cotton or linen. It slides over her head easily enough. The fabric is cool against her skin. But not unpleasantly so. Not anymore. That first sharp cold of waking has faded somewhat. She feels not warm exactly, but not cold either. Comfortable, and in a detached sort of way. Next come the drawers. Victorian women's drawers were interesting garments. Often they were actually two separate legs, tied at the waist, open in the middle for ease of use, with all the layers of clothing above. She steps into them, one leg at a time. The motion is slow, deliberate. Not from difficulty, but because there's no rush. The usual morning urgency seems distant somehow. Time feels elastic. The corset comes next. This is often where Victorian women needed help. But our woman has become quite practiced at managing on her own. She wraps it around her torso, hooks the front busk, then reaches behind to begin pulling the laces. Pull, adjust, pull, adjust. In, out, in, out. The rhythm is almost meditative. With each pull, the corset tightens, shaping her body into the fashionable silhouette of the era. Now, here's something interesting. The corset is uncomfortable. That's simply a fact. It restricts movement, compresses the rib cage, makes deep breathing difficult. For many women, wearing a corset all day meant a low-level, constant physical discomfort. But this morning, that discomfort seems muted. Present, yes, but somehow at a remove. As if she can feel the pressure, but it doesn't bother her quite as much as it might otherwise. This is the opiates working. Not dramatically, not obviously, but opiates are, among other things, painkillers. They raise the threshold at which discomfort becomes pain. They create a buffer between the body's sensations and the mind's reaction to those sensations. So the corset is still tight, still restrictive, but it's bearable. Perhaps even more than bearable. Just part of the morning routine. No more noteworthy than brushing one's hair. Over the corset goes the corset cover. A simple garment meant to protect the outer clothing from the corset's bones and laces. Then the camisole. Then the first petticoat. Victorian women typically wore multiple petticoats, each adding another layer of fullness to the skirt. On a formal day, there might be 3 or 4. Today, let's say it's a fairly ordinary day, so just 2. Each garment requires care in putting on, smoothing, adjusting, making sure everything sits properly. Our woman's movements are precise but not rushed. Her fingers work the buttons and ties with practiced ease. There's a certain pleasure in it, actually. The simple mechanical actions. The gradual building of layers. The transformation from sleepy, disheveled morning self to properly dressed Victorian lady. The dress comes last. For an ordinary day at home, it might be something relatively simple. A one-piece dress in a dark, practical color. Wool, perhaps, or a cotton-wool blend. She steps into it, works her arms through the sleeves, then begins the long process of fastening it. If there are buttons down the front, this is manageable. If they're in the back, well, she does the best she can, reaching behind, contorting slightly, getting most of them done. The top few might remain undone until a servant or family member can help, but that's acceptable for now. Throughout this entire process, which has taken perhaps 20 minutes or more, she's been aware of a certain feeling. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a gentle sense of well-being. The world seems softer somehow. The usual anxieties about the day ahead are present but distant. The mild aches and pains that come with sleeping in a Victorian bed, which was often lumpy, with a sagging mattress and springs that had seen better days, are barely noticeable. This is what the medicine was for, ultimately. Not for dramatic relief of severe symptoms, though it could provide that too, but for smoothing out the rough edges of ordinary existence, for making the daily routine more bearable, for providing a cushion between the demands of Victorian life and one's capacity to meet those demands. The smell of breakfast is beginning to drift up from the kitchen. Porridge, likely, or perhaps toast and jam. The scent of tea, strong black tea, mingles with the other smells. It's time to go downstairs and begin the social part of the day. But before that, there's often one more stop at the medicine cabinet. This one is usually in the bathroom or dressing room, if the house is large enough to have separate spaces. Otherwise, it might be in a corner of the bedroom, or even in the hallway. A small wooden cabinet, nothing fancy, maybe painted white or left in natural wood. The door has a simple latch or perhaps a small key, though the cabinet is rarely locked unless there are very young children in the house. Inside this cabinet is a collection of bottles, not just the one from the nightstand, but many others, each with its own purpose, its own time of day, its own set of symptoms it's meant to address. Let's open the cabinet and look inside, because this collection tells us a great deal about Victorian life and health. On the top shelf, the tonics. These are the daily maintenance medicines. Spring tonics were particularly popular, taken at the change of seasons to help the body adjust. Blood purifiers were another common type, meant to cleanse the system of various ill humors. Nerve tonics for anxiety and stress. Each bottle has its label, often quite elaborate, with ornate typography and sometimes illustrated with scientific-looking diagrams or exotic plants. Middle shelf. The symptom-specific remedies. Something for headaches. Something else for digestive complaints. A bottle for coughs and colds. Another for female troubles. A euphemism that could mean anything from menstrual cramps to menopausal symptoms to general reproductive health complaints. These bottles are used less regularly than the tonics, but still quite frequently. Hardly a week goes by without someone in the household needing one or another of them. Bottom shelf, the stronger medicines. The ones used only when really needed. Something for severe pain. Something for insomnia on particularly bad nights. Perhaps a bottle of chloroform, used occasionally for very severe headaches or toothaches. These bottles are often smaller, and their labels carry slightly more serious warnings, though nothing like the warning labels we're accustomed to today. Our woman surveys this collection for a moment. It's automatic by now, this mental inventory. Do any bottles need refilling? Is anything running low? The chemist shop is only a short walk away, but it's good to plan ahead. She makes a mental note that the cough mixture is getting low. Not urgent, as no one is currently ill, but worth remembering for the next shopping trip. She selects one more bottle. This one is a digestive tonic. For sluggish systems and torpid liver. The label claims. She measures out a dose, slightly larger than the one recommended on the bottle, but only slightly. After all, she knows her own system, doesn't she? And the recommended dose never seems quite enough. Just a bit more. Just to be sure. This is how it happens so often. The gradual creep upward in dosing, not from any dramatic desperation or addiction in the way we might think of it, but simply from the logic of tolerance. The body adapts. What once provided relief no longer does quite. So you take a little more. Then a little more. Not all at once. Not even consciously, really. Just gradually, over months, over years. Downstairs, the family is gathering for breakfast. A Victorian middle-class household might include parents, several children, perhaps an older relative or two. Everyone takes their place at the table. The children are already eating, having been fed earlier in the kitchen. The adults sit down to their meal. And here's where we see something revealing. On the breakfast table, alongside the tea service and the marmalade, there's often a small tray with medicine bottles. This isn't hidden away. It's not shameful. It's just part of the breakfast routine. Father takes his digestive tonic with his tea. Mother has already had hers, but she might take a spoonful of something else. Perhaps that nerve tonic, just to face the day ahead. If there's an older relative, someone with chronic pain or illness, their morning medications might be more elaborate still. The children watch all of this, and they learn that medicine is simply part of life. Something adults do. Something that helps you feel well, or at least helps you feel well enough to carry on with your duties. This normalization is crucial. It means that when these children grow up, they'll have no hesitation about using these same medicines. It's what one does. It's what their parents did. What everyone does. After breakfast comes the work of running a household. For our Victorian woman, this might mean meeting with the cook to plan meals, or supervising the cleaning, or managing the household accounts. Or, if this is a less prosperous household without servants, doing much of this work herself. Let's follow her through a typical morning of household tasks, paying attention to how the medicine continues to affect her experience. She starts in the drawing room. This room needs tidying. Cushions to be plumped, surfaces to be dusted. Everything returned to its proper place after yesterday's activities. She moves through the room with steady purpose. Not quickly. Victorian ladies were not supposed to rush or show signs of physical exertion, but steadily, methodically. As she works, she notices that she's humming softly to herself. When did that start? She isn't sure, but it's pleasant. The tune is something she heard at church last Sunday, or perhaps it was at a neighbor's house during a visit. It doesn't matter. The humming just happens. And it makes the work feel lighter somehow. The dusting cloth moves across the mantelpiece. The marble is cool beneath her hand, but the sensation is somehow pleasing. There's a heightened awareness of textures, of the way the cloth glides over smooth surfaces and catches slightly on rough ones. This is another subtle effect of opiates, an enhanced appreciation of sensory details. Not dramatic, not hallucinogenic, just more. She picks up ornaments to dust beneath them. A china shepherdess, a brass candlestick, a small framed photograph of a departed relative. Each object receives her full attention for a moment. She notices things she might ordinarily overlook. The fineness of the china's glaze, the weight of the brass, the way the photograph has faded slightly around the edges. It's all quite fascinating, in a gentle, undemanding sort of way. Time passes. How much time? It's hard to say. The clock on the mantelpiece shows 9:30, then 10 o'clock, then 10:30. But the passage of time feels smooth, continuous, without the usual sense of urgency or pressure. There's always time, plenty of time. The morning stretches out endlessly. This temporal distortion is one of the more subtle effects of opiates, particularly when taken regularly. The usual anxious awareness of time passing, the sense that one must hurry, must accomplish things, must keep to a schedule, becomes muted. Things still get done. Tasks are still completed. But the feeling of pressure is reduced. Everything happens at its own pace, and that pace feels just right. Moving to the next task now. The morning room, where letters need to be written. Correspondence was a significant part of Victorian middle-class life. Thank you notes for dinner invitations. Replies to friends' letters. notes to tradesmen about deliveries or accounts. A well-bred woman might spend several hours per week just on correspondence. She sits at the writing desk. The chair is upholstered in a fabric that's slightly scratchy, even through her layers of clothing. But again, this doesn't particularly bother her. She arranges her writing materials: paper, envelopes, pen, ink. Each object is placed just so. There's a pleasure in this arrangement, in the orderliness of it all. The pen is dipped in ink. The first letter begins. Her handwriting is neat, controlled, flowing across the page in the elaborate script favored by her era. The formation of each letter requires care. The loops and flourishes must be just right. This, too, becomes almost meditative. The scratch of the nib on paper, the slight resistance of the paper's texture, the way the ink darkens and settles into the fibers. The letter is to a friend, a chatty letter, full of small news and observations. The weather has been quite fine, she writes. The roses in the garden are beginning to bloom. We had the Johnsons to dinner last Tuesday, and Mrs. Johnson was wearing the most extraordinary hat. The words flow easily. There's no struggle to think of what to say. The social formulas of Victorian correspondence are second nature by now, and in this gently elevated state, they come even more readily. She signs the letter with a flourish, blots it carefully, folds it just so, addresses the envelope, places a stamp, another letter done. She feels a small sense of accomplishment, but it's mild, not urgent. Just a quiet satisfaction. By 11 o'clock, the morning's tasks are well underway. The household is running smoothly. If there are servants, they're busy with their assigned duties. If not, our Victorian woman has accomplished enough that she can take a brief rest. This is when the first hints of the next dose begin to creep in. Not a desperate craving. Nothing so dramatic. Just a subtle awareness. A slight restlessness. A very mild sense that something is not quite right. Energy levels beginning to drop just a little. That pleasant glow from the morning dose starting to fade at the edges. She might not even consciously recognize what this feeling is. It's just time. Time for her mid-morning routine, which includes, among other things, checking the medicine cabinet again. But first, tea. Mid-morning tea was a common ritual in Victorian middle-class households. Not the elaborate afternoon tea with sandwiches and cakes, but a simpler affair. A cup of tea, perhaps a biscuit, a brief pause in the day's activities. She rings for tea, or if there's no servant, she goes to the kitchen to prepare it herself. The kettle is put on to boil. The tea leaves are measured into the pot. There's a particular comfort in these familiar actions. The routine of it, the predictability. While waiting for the water to boil, she might stand at the kitchen window and look out at the garden. Or the street, if it's a city household. Just standing, just looking, letting her mind wander. This is actually one of the times when the effects of the morning's medicine are most apparent, though in a paradoxical way. She's able to simply be still, to not feel the pressure to be constantly doing something. Victorian middle-class women were supposed to be ceaselessly productive, always engaged in some useful or improving activity. Idleness was considered almost sinful. But right now, standing by the window, she feels perfectly content to do nothing. just to exist in this moment, watching dust motes drift through sunlight, or observing a sparrow hopping along the garden path. The kettle whistles. She makes the tea, brings it to wherever she plans to sit, perhaps back to the morning room, or in the drawing room if the fire has been lit there. She sits, sips. The tea is hot, strong, slightly bitter. She's used no sugar in it. The patent medicine she took this morning was sweet enough. Too much sugar throughout the day would be unpleasant. As she drinks her tea, she becomes aware of that subtle restlessness again. It's not uncomfortable exactly, just a faint sense of incompleteness, as if something remains undone. She reviews the morning mentally. The tidying is finished. The letters are written. What else was on today's list? Shopping. But that's for this afternoon. Meeting with the dressmaker tomorrow. Dinner menu already planned with the cook. Everything is attended to. And yet, that subtle, nagging sense of something missing. This is the early stage of withdrawal. Not the dramatic, painful withdrawal that comes from suddenly stopping heavy opiate use, but the mild, almost imperceptible withdrawal that happens between doses when one has been using regularly. The body has adapted to the presence of opiates. It now expects them. When the level in the bloodstream drops below a certain point, the body begins to protest, very gently at first. Most Victorian users of patent medicines never recognized this for what it was. They interpreted it as exactly what they'd been using the medicine to treat in the first place. Nervousness, fatigue, general malaise. That's what the medicine was for, after all. And look, it was working. She'd felt fine all morning after taking it. But now, a few hours later, those feelings were returning. So clearly she needed another dose. The logic was circular but invisible. She finishes her tea, stands, smooths her skirts, and makes her way to the medicine cabinet. This time, she selects a slightly different bottle. Perhaps the nerve tonic. Or maybe something marketed for general debility. The specific brand doesn't matter as much as the rich, the opening of the cabinet, the selection of the appropriate remedy, the careful measuring, the dose taken with a sip of water or tea. The effect is not immediate. It takes 15 or 20 minutes for the medicine to be fully absorbed, for the active ingredients to reach the bloodstream in sufficient quantities to make a difference. But there's an immediate psychological effect. Simply having taken the medicine produces a sense of relief. Help is on the way. Soon she'll feel better. Soon that vague unease will lift. And it does. 20 minutes later, perhaps half an hour, there's a subtle shift. The restlessness settles. The sense of incompleteness fades. That gentle glow returns. Not as strong as it was first thing in the morning. You never quite recapture that first dose's effect. But noticeable. Pleasant. The day can continue. And it does, in much the same way, hour after hour. Tasks are completed. Social obligations are met. Everything appears entirely normal from the outside. And indeed, it is normal. This is simply how life was lived. For many Victorian people, particularly women of the middle and upper classes. Afternoon in Victorian society often meant social calls. These were not casual visits, as we might think of them today, but rather a formalized system of social interaction with specific rules and expectations. a middle-class woman might spend several afternoons per week paying calls on friends and acquaintances or receiving calls at her own home. Our Victorian woman has several calls to make this afternoon. She's changed into a more formal day dress, still practical enough for afternoon, but nicer than what she wore for the morning's household tasks. Her hair has been redone, pinned more elaborately. A hat is pinned carefully to her coiffure. Gloves are pulled on. A small reticule or handbag completes the ensemble. And in that reticule, several items. A calling card case, of course. A small coin purse. A handkerchief. And a small bottle of medicine. This might be a tiny bottle specifically purchased for carrying, or it might be a regular bottle decanted into something more portable. Either way, it goes everywhere with her. Just in case. Just to be safe. Because here's the thing about regular patent medicine use. Once you've been doing it for a while, the thought of being away from your medicine for any extended period becomes uncomfortable. Not impossible. Not unthinkable. Just uncomfortable. What if you need it and don't have it? Better to be prepared. The walk to the first house where she'll call is not long, perhaps 10 minutes. It's a pleasant afternoon, let's say early autumn, with that particular quality of light that autumn brings. The air is crisp, but not yet cold. Leaves are beginning to turn color. As she walks, she's aware of the rhythm of her steps, the rustle of her skirts, the way her heels tap against the pavement. Everything is slightly enhanced, slightly more vivid, in that way that's becoming so familiar. Colors seem richer, sounds are clearer, but not overwhelming, just more present. She arrives at the house, rings the bell, is admitted by a maid, gives her card, is shown into the drawing room where her hostess is receiving. And here begins the intricate dance of Victorian social calling. There are already 2 other women in the room when she enters. Greetings are exchanged. Tea is offered and accepted. The conversation begins. A careful balance of pleasant chat about nothing too serious or controversial. The weather, a recent concert, mutual acquaintances, the latest fashions. Everyone is pleasant. Everyone is appropriate. Everyone is playing their role in the social machinery of Victorian middle-class life. And everyone, quite possibly, has taken their afternoon dose of medicine before coming out for calls. This is not discussed, of course. It would be indelicate to mention such things. But the evidence is there if you know what to look for. That slight glassiness to the eyes. The particularly relaxed posture. The way someone might trail off mid-sentence. Not from forgetting what they were saying, but from a lack of urgency about completing the thought. The slight delay in responses, as if words are travelling through a pleasant fog before reaching the mouth. Tea is drunk. Biscuits are consumed, though nobody is really hungry. The conversation continues in its gentle, meandering way. Time passes in that elastic Victorian afternoon way, where half an hour might feel like 10 minutes, or might feel like an hour depending. At the appropriate time, exactly 15 minutes if this is just a formal call. Longer if genuine friendship is involved. Our woman makes her farewells. More calls to make. She moves on to the next house, the next drawing room, the next round of tea and polite conversation. By the 3rd or 4th call, she's beginning to feel that familiar restlessness again. Just slightly, just at the edges. She checks the small watch pinned to her bodice. Another hour before she can reasonably go home. Another house or two to visit. The thought is slightly daunting, but manageable. Because she has that small bottle in her reticule. She doesn't take it yet, not in public. That would be inappropriate, even though there's nothing technically shameful about taking medicine. But it's a private thing, a personal thing. Better to wait until she has a moment alone. That moment comes when she excuses herself to use the bathroom at the next house she visits. Victorian plumbing was still relatively primitive in many homes, but the water closet was improving in design and becoming more common. She locks the door. Finally, a moment of complete privacy. The bottle comes out of her reticule. The cork is pulled. The medicine is measured. Just a small dose, not a full one. Just enough to take the edge off until she gets home. She swallows it quickly, replaces the bottle, checks her appearance in the mirror. Her face looks back at her. Perfectly composed, perfectly appropriate. Nothing shows. Nothing ever shows. She returns to the drawing room. The conversation continues, and she begins to feel better. That anticipated relief followed shortly by the actual relief as the medicine takes effect. The afternoon becomes manageable again, pleasant even. Before returning home, there's one more stop to make. The chemist's shop. This is partly practical. She'd noted this morning that the cough mixture was running low, and it's always good to keep the medicine cabinet well stocked. But it's also, though she wouldn't quite articulate it this way, reassuring. Just to see all those bottles. Just to know they're available. The Victorian chemist shop was a fascinating place. Not like a modern pharmacy, all fluorescent lights and plastic bottles. This was a world of dark wood and glass and the complex smells of dozens of different substances. Let's step inside and spend some time here, because it's worth understanding. The bell above the door jingles as she enters. The shop is not large. Perhaps the size of a modest living room in a middle-class home. But every inch of wall space is used. Floor-to-ceiling shelving holds hundreds of bottles, jars, and boxes. Dark glass bottles with handwritten labels. Ceramic jars with Latin names painted in gold leaf. Wooden boxes containing pills or powders. Behind the counter, the chemist himself. Or perhaps his assistant. Victorian chemists were respected figures in their communities. They were seen as men of science, of learning. Many had served apprenticeships lasting several years. They knew their compounds, their preparations, their formulas. Or at least, they were supposed to. "Good afternoon," our woman says. "I'd like a bottle of your cough mixture, please. The usual kind." "Of course, madam. Will there be anything else?" She pauses, considers. Perhaps some of the nerve tonic as well. The one in the blue bottle. "Excellent choice, madam. Very popular. Very efficacious." The chemist turns to his shelves, selecting the appropriate bottles. But he doesn't just hand them over. This is the Victorian era, and service is more personal. He might ask about her general health, her family's health. Make recommendations for other products. Mention that a new formula has just come in from London, very advanced. Contains the latest scientific discoveries. Would she like to try a bottle? This conversation is part sales technique, part genuine care, and part medical consultation. Because chemists often served as the first line of medical advice for people who couldn't afford or didn't want to bother with a doctor. The boundaries between selling medicines and practicing medicine were quite blurry. Our woman listens to his recommendations. She's not necessarily going to buy everything he suggests, but it's interesting to hear what's new, what's popular, what other people are finding helpful. She makes a few additional purchases. A bottle of the new formula, why not? Some lozenges that might be nice to have on hand. A tin of powder for headaches that's different from her usual brand but sounds intriguing. As the chemist wraps her purchases, each bottle carefully wrapped in paper, the whole package tied with string, she looks around the shop. Other customers are browsing. A man selecting something for indigestion. A woman with a child asking for something to help the child sleep. An older gentleman requesting his regular bottle of rheumatism medicine. Everyone is here for the same reason ultimately, seeking relief, seeking comfort, seeking some way to make their lives more bearable, or at least more manageable. And the Victorian chemist shop provided that, in bottle after bottle after bottle. She pays for her purchases. The chemist records the sale in his ledger. Many families had accounts that would be settled monthly. She thanks him and leaves, the bell jingling again as the door closes behind her. The package of medicines goes into her shopping basket, along with other purchases from earlier. Some ribbon from the haberdashers, a packet of tea, a small household item. All the ordinary business of a Victorian afternoon. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. The walk home is pleasant. Our woman is feeling quite well, actually. The medicine she took while out making calls has reached its full effect. The new purchases in her basket provide a sense of security. All is well. All is managed. All is as it should be. But here's something worth examining. What does feeling well mean in this context? Because if we were to observe our Victorian woman from the outside, with modern eyes and modern knowledge, we might not think she looks entirely well. There's a certain lethargy to her movements, a slight lack of focus in her gaze. Her pupils are perhaps a bit smaller than they should be in the late afternoon light. But she feels well. And in the Victorian era, that was largely what mattered. The internal experience of wellness, not external markers. If you felt capable of performing your duties, of meeting your social obligations, of getting through the day, well then you were well. Never mind that this sense of wellness was chemically induced and increasingly dependent on continued medication. This is one of the most insidious aspects of patent medicine use. It didn't feel like a problem. For most people, most of the time, it felt like a solution. You had difficulties, fatigue, anxiety, pain, insomnia, and the medicine addressed those difficulties. That it did so by creating a new difficulty, dependence, was not immediately apparent. Moreover, the Victorian concept of health was quite different from ours. The idea that one should feel energetic and vigorous all the time would have seemed strange. Life was expected to be somewhat difficult. The body was expected to have complaints. Women in particular were thought to be naturally somewhat frail, somewhat prone to nerves and other vague ailments. This was just how things were. So if a woman needed to take medicine daily in order to feel well enough to perform her duties, that wasn't seen as a problem. That was seen as sensible medical management. Self-care, we might call it today, though the Victorians wouldn't have used that term. She was taking responsibility for her health, using the tools available to her, being practical and reasonable. And the medicine did help in many ways. It really did. The anxiety that might otherwise have been paralyzing became manageable. The chronic pain from various sources, the corset, the bad mattress, the hours of standing and walking in impractical shoes became bearable. The depression that might have left someone bedbound became just a vague melancholy that could be pushed through. So as our Victorian woman arrives home, tired but satisfied with her afternoon's accomplishments, she's not thinking about addiction or dependence or any of the things we might think about now. She's thinking about whether the new pattern she saw at the draper's would work for her autumn dress, about whether she should invite the Smiths to dinner next week, about ordinary things, normal things, because this is normal. This is simply life. And she's managing it quite well, thank you very much. With a little help from her medicine, of course. But that's what medicine is for, isn't it? To help you manage. To help you cope. To help you carry on. She removes her hat, her gloves, changes into a more comfortable dress for the evening. The package from the chemist is unpacked. The new bottles added to the medicine cabinet. Everything in its place. Everything ordered and proper. It's almost time for dinner. But first, a moment's rest. She sits in her chair by the window, lets her head fall back against the cushion, closes her eyes, just for a moment, just to gather herself before the evening's activity begin. And in this moment of rest, feeling the last waves of the afternoon's medicine working through her system, she feels content. Not ecstatic, not even particularly happy, just content, peaceful, at ease in her own skin and in her own life. This is what the medicine promised. In this moment, at least, it has delivered. As evening approaches and the household prepares for dinner, another round of medicine taking begins. But the evening doses often serve a different purpose from the morning and afternoon ones. Where morning medicine was about facing the day, getting things done, managing activity, evening medicine is increasingly about managing the transition toward rest, about preparing for sleep, about winding down. Let's observe a typical evening routine, paying attention to how medicine weaves throughout. First, there's the before-dinner dose. This is particularly common among men of the household, though women take it too. For men, it might be framed as a digestive aid, something to prepare the stomach for the meal ahead. For women, it might be that nerve tonic again, or something for female troubles that always seem worse in the evening. Our Victorian woman has changed into her dinner dress. Nothing too formal. This is just family dinner, not a grand entertainment. But still, appearances must be maintained even within the family. The dress is looser than her daytime clothing, more comfortable. But she's still corseted, still properly attired. Before going down to dinner, she stops at the medicine cabinet. The bottle she selects this time is different from her daytime choices. Something specifically marketed for evening use. For restful digestion and peaceful repose, the label promises. Or perhaps to soothe the nerves after a busy day. The dose she takes is measured according to habit rather than the label's instructions. She's learned over time exactly how much she needs, which is to say, slightly more than the recommended dose. Not dramatically more. Just a bit more, because the recommended dose doesn't quite do what it used to. The body adapts, you see. Tolerance builds. What once was sufficient becomes insufficient, and you adjust accordingly. She swallows the medicine with a sip of water from the basin on her dressing table. The taste is familiar. Not entirely pleasant, but not unpleasant either. Just familiar. Comforting in its familiarity, actually. Downstairs, the family is gathering for dinner. This is one of the main social rituals of the Victorian day, even when it's just family. Everyone is expected to be present, properly dressed, ready to engage in appropriate conversation. The meal will be multiple courses, even in a relatively modest household. Soup, fish or meat, possibly a savoury, then dessert. Wine might be served, though not always. Tea or water are more common for daily family dinners. The table is set. Everyone takes their places. Grace is said. The meal begins. And here's where we can observe something interesting about the effects of patent medicines on appetite and eating. Because opiates affect digestion in complex ways. They slow the movement of food through the digestive system. They can suppress appetite. They can cause constipation. But they can also make the sensory experience of eating more pleasant. That same heightened awareness of texture and taste that we noted earlier. Our Victorian woman might not be particularly hungry, actually. But she eats anyway, because not eating would be noticed, would require explanation. The soup is consumed. The fish or meat is eaten, though perhaps not all of it. The dessert, something simple, perhaps a pudding or stewed fruit, is managed. Throughout the meal, conversation flows. Nothing too serious. The children, if they're old enough to dine with the adults, might talk about their lessons or their day's activities. Father might mention something from his work, though not in too much detail. Business talk at dinner was considered somewhat vulgar. Mother, our Victorian woman, contributes her own observations about the day. The afternoon call she made, the news she heard, small domestic matters. Everyone is pleasant, everyone is appropriate, and quite possibly everyone has medicine in their system. Father with his digestive aid, mother with her nerve tonic. Even the older children might have been given something, a spoonful of cough syrup, just to be safe, or some tonic to help them grow strong. This multi-generational medicine use is another aspect of Victorian patent medicine culture worth noting. It was truly normalized across all ages and both sexes. Children were dosed from infancy onward. The elderly were often taking multiple medicines simultaneously, and everyone in between had their own bottles, their own doses, their own routines. After dinner comes the evening's leisure time. For our Victorian woman, this might mean needlework or reading, perhaps playing the piano if the family has one, or simply sitting in the drawing room, engaged in quiet conversation with family members. The pace is slow, the activities are gentle, the end of the day is approaching. But as the evening progresses, she becomes aware of a growing heaviness. Not unpleasant, but definitely present. Her eyelids feel weighted, her limbs feel heavier. The chair she is sitting in seems increasingly comfortable. The thought of moving, of getting up and going upstairs to bed, requires more effort to contemplate than it should. This is partly the natural tiredness of the day's end, but it's also the accumulation of the day's medicine, all the various doses taken from morning through evening building up in her system. The body is awash in opiates. The brain's chemistry is altered. Drowsiness is inevitable. She's not alone in this. Looking around the drawing room, she might see her husband beginning to nod off in his chair, the newspaper slipping from his hands, an older relative already dozing openly. Even the children, if they're still up, looking heavy-eyed and ready for bed. The Victorian evening, particularly in colder months when nightfall came early and artificial light was expensive, tended to be a drawn-out affair of gradual winding down. People didn't suddenly decide it was bedtime and rush off. Instead, there was a long, gentle slide towards sleep, with the evening's activities becoming less and less energetic, until eventually, finally, everyone made their way to bed. Medicine both facilitated this pattern and was facilitated by it. The drowsiness caused by accumulating opiate doses fit perfectly with the expected evening routine. And conversely, the evening routine made it easy to incorporate multiple doses of medicine without it seeming excessive or problematic. Our woman eventually rouses herself enough to announce that she's retiring for the night. There are good nights to be said, the final evening tasks to be completed. Banking the fire, making sure doors are locked, checking that everything is in order for the night and the next morning. These tasks are accomplished, though they feel like they require tremendous effort. Moving through water might feel similar. Everything possible, but requiring more force than usual. Finally, upstairs. Back to the bedroom where the day began. The evening's undressing routine begins. This is simpler than the morning's dressing, at least. No need for precision or care, just the removal of layers, dress, petticoats, corset. Blessed relief when that comes off, even though she barely felt it during the evening. Chemise. The nightgown goes on. Something soft, comfortable, made for sleep. The pins come out of her hair, falling into the dish kept on the dressing table for that purpose. Hair is brushed, 50 strokes or 100, depending on what her mother taught her about hair care. The rhythmic brushing is almost meditative, the bristles scraping against her scalp, each stroke counting down towards sleep. But before getting into bed, there's one more stop at the medicine cabinet. The nighttime dose. The nighttime medicine is perhaps the most important dose of the entire day, because this is the one that has to last all night. This is the one that has to ensure sleep comes and continues uninterrupted. Because the Victorian bedroom, as we mentioned before, was often cold and the bed often uncomfortable, and there were many reasons why sleep might be elusive without chemical assistance. The bottle selected for nighttime is usually one specifically marketed as a sleep aid, for peaceful rest and pleasant dreams. To ensure untroubled slumber, the labels promise much, and often they deliver. Not because the medicine was particularly good at treating whatever underlying issues might have been causing insomnia, but because opiates are very, very good at making people drowsy. She measures the dose. Nighttime doses are often larger than daytime ones. The reasoning is simple. It has to work strongly enough to induce sleep and to keep working for several hours. So more is needed. Or at least, that's the justification. The reality might simply be that tolerance is highest at night after a full day of medicine use, and more is required to achieve any effect at all. The liquid goes down, chased with water. The bottle is returned to its place. Everything is made ready for morning, her dressing gown placed where she can easily find it. Her slippers positioned by the bed. She climbs into bed. The sheets are cold, but there's a warming pan that's been run between them earlier by a servant. Or if there's no servant, she might have done it herself. The warmth is pleasant. The pillow accepts her head. The blankets are heavy. Victorian blankets were often quite heavy, multiple layers of wool or cotton. That weight is comforting, cocooning, safe. And now she waits for sleep. Sometimes it comes quickly. The medicine from the nighttime dose combining with all the previous doses to simply shut down conscious thought. One moment she's aware, the next she's not. Simple as that. Other times there's a period of floating. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. A pleasant liminal state where thoughts drift by without urgency or coherence. Images appear behind closed eyelids. Fragments of the day's events, memories mixing with imagination. Nothing makes complete sense, but nothing needs to. It's all just happening. And she's observing it distantly, peacefully. Sensations become heightened and strange. The weight of the blankets feels like water, pressing down gently from all sides. Her body feels both heavy and weightless simultaneously. The pillow beneath her head might feel like it's shifting, very slowly, though of course it isn't. Time becomes completely elastic. Has she been lying here for minutes or hours? Impossible to say. Impossible to care. This state can last for quite a while. Sometimes she might even open her eyes, look around the dark room, then close them again and sink back into that floating place. The medicine is strong enough that even this brief return to consciousness doesn't feel jarring or unwelcome. Just a brief moment of awareness before letting go again. Eventually, finally, true sleep comes. Deep, dreamless sleep, usually. Opiates tend to suppress REM sleep, the stage where most dreaming occurs. So, Victorian patent medicine users often reported sleeping very soundly, but not dreaming much. This was generally considered a positive thing. Dreams were often thought of as disturbances to sleep, rather than a natural part of it. The night passes. Hours go by. The house is dark and quiet. Outside, the street is empty, or nearly so. Only the occasional constable on his rounds, or a late traveller hurrying home, disturbs the silence. Inside, everyone sleeps. Deeply. Heavily, aided by their various medicines. And in the morning, it will all begin again. The waking, the cold, the first dose to start the day. The routine will repeat. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. This is simply how life is lived. How it's always been lived, or so it seems. How it will presumably always be lived. Until eventually, something changes. But that's a different story, and not one we're telling tonight. For now, let's just observe this Victorian woman as she sleeps. Breathing slowly, deeply. The medicine doing its work. The body processing and metabolizing. The brain cycling through its altered states. Everything functioning. Everything managed. Everything controlled by that careful regimen of bottles and spoons and measured doses. Tomorrow will bring its own demands, its own challenges. But tomorrow is tomorrow. For now, there is only sleep. Deep, medicine-induced, but nonetheless restorative in its own way. The body rests, the mind quiets. And another day of Victorian patent medicine use comes to its close.